Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a few minutes, just at the top of the hour. We're just going to wait so everyone has a chance to join. In the meanwhile, though, we'd love to hear from you. So let us know where you're joining from using the comments or the chat, depending on what platform you're watching from. And yeah, tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout the session, please let us know in the chat and the comments, and I will be saving them for the Q&A as well. And if you haven't already, get registered for this event on DataCamp, and we will send you the recording to your email address. I'll post a link in the chat so you can get registered for that shortly. But until then, enjoy the background music. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in a few minutes, just at the top of the hour. We're just waiting so everyone has a chance to join. Let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching from. And yeah, tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout the session, please let us know as soon as they spring to mind. Post it in the chat or the comments, and I will save it for the Q&A. Few bits of housekeeping before we get going. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event. So if you haven't already registered for the event, head over to LinkedIn or check the comments here, and I've posted a link so you can get registered. If you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments, or let us know in the chat, and I will be able to help you with that. Brilliant. We'll be starting in about a minute or so, but until then, enjoy the background music. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Reese, and I'll be your moderator today. We're going to kick off today's session in about 20 seconds or so. We've just been waiting so everyone has had a chance to join. Let us know where you're joining from using the chat or the comments, depending on what platform you're watching on. And yeah, tell us something that you'd like to get out of today's webinar. Just one thing to note, the session is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to everyone that's registered for the event on DataCamp. I've posted a link to that in the comments, but you can also find it on LinkedIn as well. I'll also post it again shortly for anyone that's missed it. We also are going to have an audience Q&A during the session today. So if you have any questions at any point throughout the session, let us know in the comments, and I will save them for the Q&A. Brilliant. I think that's everything from me. So now I'll hand you over to your host for today's session, Adele. Adele, please take it away.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Adele. I am VP of Media at DataCamp. I think we are live. It is an absolute thrill, pleasure, and honor to be hosting today's session, one of many this month, covering all things Data and AI Literacy Month in honor of Data AI Literacy. So, give a bit of a context and some background. Every year, the world celebrates International Literacy Day on September 8th. But as data and AI become increasingly integral to our daily lives and pervasive and ambient in our lives, building data and AI literacy, whether you're an individual or within an organization, is paramount. So this month, we're going to cover a lot of different angles, a lot of different takes, a lot of different perspectives on data and AI literacy, how to build it, how to approach it, success stories, and a lot more. And it's really awesome hosting these sessions because we really get to prove the global nature of the data and AI literacy conversation. Kind of surface here some of the comments that we've got. Uh, we have Ihtisham from Glasgow. Great to see you. Maybe some housekeeping as well from LinkedIn user. Do you record this session? Yes, LinkedIn user, we do record this session. We have Fatima from Teradata, Pakistan. Great to see you. We have here Adekola from Nigeria. It's great to see you as well. Turdabeva, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Kyrgyzstan. Uh, Juan from Colombia. Barak joining us from Turkey. Thank you for Data and AI Literacy Month. We really, really appreciate that. Jonas from Sweden. We have Charlita from Uganda. Folks from Nepal. We have Shane from Orlando. We have LinkedIn user. Sorry, can't see your name. Hello from Italy. Great. Isabel from Belgium. I'm now based in Belgium. It's great to see you. And we're getting messages from all over the world. We have here from London, right? So India, Costa Rica, Nigeria. So I think we're going to cover all the continents by the time we wrap up today's session, which is always awesome to see. Now, as we kick off Data and AI Literacy Month, I am so excited for this session to be the first session of the month. As you know, arguably, for me at least, one of the most exciting applications and value drivers of data and AI is in government. When we think about the discourse surrounding government and the effectiveness of government, we usually only think about the size of government and its budget, whether small government, big government. How should we approach optimizing government agencies for delivering value for stakeholders? However, another equally, if not more important dimension to the effectiveness of government in this debate is how effective is government at delivering value for stakeholders given its limited resources. And when used responsibly, data and AI are excellent tools for driving efficiencies within government agencies, which can only help these agencies deliver better outcomes using the same resources. But a key aspect of building successful data and AI use cases within government is building data and AI literacy as well. So, how can you best approach that as a government leader? How do you navigate the data and AI opportunity landscape? How do you align your data strategy with value creation? A lot of these questions will be answered today with Richard Davis, Chief Data Strategy Officer at Ofcom. Richard, it's great to have you on.
Thank you for having me, Adele. It's been absolutely amazing seeing all these people coming in from all over the world, and also impressed with your knowledge of flags. Some of those.
It's we've been hosting a lot of these, so I'm getting used to the flags. Now, before we get started, a bit about Richard. Richard is the Chief Data Officer at Ofcom, the main telecommunication regulatory body in the UK. In this role, he is responsible for enabling data analytics capabilities across the organization. Sorry, for the Americans in the crowd, maybe Ofcom is like the UK's Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. So before Ofcom, Richard worked as a quantitative analyst as well as the former head of analytics and innovation at Lloyds Bank, where he built his wealth of experience across a variety of data roles. Now, before we get started with today's session, just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. Yes, this session is being recorded. The recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. If you did not register to the event, make sure to register to it. Reese will be sending it in the chat. That way you'll be able to get the follow-up emails. The discussion will be followed by a Q&A. You don't need to wait until the end to ask your questions. So type them in, and we'll make sure to ask them to Richard at the end of the session. If you have any non-webinar related questions, or if you encounter any technical issues, do ping us in the chat as well, and we'll make sure to address it as soon as possible. Throughout the session as well, on the LinkedIn comments, on the YouTube comments, wherever you are watching this, we'll be sharing a lot of different resources related to data and AI literacy month, data upskilling, AI, etc. Make sure to check those out. Keep a copy of them. You can always revisit them back in the LinkedIn chat, but you won't be able to save them. They won't be sent. They won't be sent in the follow-up email. And I think with that, the housekeeping is done. We can officially get started, Richard. So, Richard, as I said, it's great to have you on. As we discussed, you are the chief data officer at Ofcom. So, maybe to set the stage, walk us in a bit more detail about Ofcom's mission, and more importantly, what does data and AI mean for Ofcom?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ofcom is the UK's converged regulator for communications. So it's independent from government, but working under statute from government. So we have legislation that's been put in place that we're then using for our regulation. In terms of our mission, it's to make communications work for everyone. And Ofcom covers that full gamut of communications, so everything from the radio spectrum, which will cover your ship to ship radios, through to space communications, but also we'll go through to post. We look at the broadcast, so public sector broadcasters, through to online, with the online safety bill coming in scope later this year. But then also look at everything from mobile to broadband and telco. So there's a number of pieces of legislation that give Ofcom its powers. And what are our four key priorities? We set these out in our 3-year plan. They're to give us an internet that we can rely on, media we trust and value. We live a safer life online, and enabling wireless services in the wider economy. So that again covers those full range of communications that I mentioned. But underpinning all of that, we look at some key areas of horizontal investment. And two of those are looking to expand our technical capabilities, but also building a bigger data and digital function. And it's that part of it, the data and digital parts, that I'm really looking at. Say, well, how can we use data? How do we use AI, the analytics, to enable Ofcom to make use of the huge amounts of data and information that we gather, to put that at the fingertips of the policy, the operations colleagues, so they can use that within their decision making. To give some examples, in the spectrum side, so this is the radio communication side, we're looking to enable the colleagues there to proactively monitor the sale of illegal radio equipment using some AI and some data ingestion methods. We're helping understand the data that shows where consumers will receive good mobile data experience and how that changes across the country. But also helping the teams that analyze broadcast complaints. So when people are complaining about certain shows that are on public sector broadcasters, how do we enable the interpretation of those complaints and speed up the responses from our colleagues? And so a large part of this is driven by that data, that machine learning, the data science, everything that's within that. And we're trying to make Ofcom more data-driven, be more proactive using data, and put the power in the hands of the people who will be able to use that, and helping them to understand where data is and what it means. And this is why, for me, talking about data, AI literally is so important, because it's not just the data professionals that we're talking about, the people who are skilled experts, but also every single colleague that works in Ofcom, and helping them to understand how to interpret data to do their job as effectively as possible.
That's really great. And you mentioned these use cases, and what I love about these use cases is they ultimately make communications and life better for the stakeholders. Whether protecting citizens from illegal radio equipment that are being sold that could be used for harmful outcomes, making sure that communications is flowing safely on the internet. And there's a lot of ways data and AI can drive a lot of value there, and I'm excited to unpack that with you. But first, I want to talk to you about how you're approaching building data and AI capabilities within Ofcom. Last time we spoke, it was on the Data Frame podcast, also around a similar topic of enabling government with data and AI, and you were in the process of building Ofcom's data strategy, right? And I think probably tagline of the year for data strategies. Good people, good data, and good decisions. These are the three principles on Ofcom's data strategy. So maybe to set the stage, walk us through that data strategy in more detail. What does good people, good data, good decisions look like in practice? And how has it changed since we last discussed? What have you learned about what makes an effective data strategy in the government space?
Yes, I think I can't remember when we last spoke. It would have been earlier this year, Q1, I think. And at that stage, we'd just got to the stage of defining what it looked like and starting to communicate it out more broadly across Ofcom. And as always, as the rubber hits the road, things start to change, which is good. So we want to be agile, we want to change to the situations. And part of what we're looking at was then say, how do we make sure that we're really selling that as much as possible and trying to pull in people and take them on a journey. So looking at this and saying, how do we really unleash the power of data across the entire Ofcom? And that's really our key message. But those three things that you talked about, those are still key drivers for what we're looking to do across the data strategy. We've got four pillars that we talked through before. I'll talk through them again and just say how they look. So the data culture is the first of those. So that's looking to say, how do we ignite a revolution where data empowers every colleague across Ofcom to harness its innovative potential. So that's everything around how we upskill people and use the people skills effectively. Data delivery, we say, how do we unlock the true value of data, delivering our 3-year plan, keeping to the mission. Data excellence, saying how do we elevate the data, create a culture of excellence that safely leverages the data. And data platforms, then looking at using the latest tools to seamlessly orchestrate the flow of information, enabling teams to make faster data-driven decisions. So that was great, and it really strong, hit a chord with the data people that we're speaking to. But as we started to then take this out to people who weren't data people, they're saying, well, what are you actually going to deliver? And we had concentrated very much on the how to deliver data and how we could get that out to people, but we weren't looking at then what would be delivered. This would enable us to deliver, but we weren't talking about what that would do. So now we're trying to focus that little message around three key things that all of those pillars of the data strategy will enable us to deliver. So these are looking at increasing our efficiency. So as I'm sure many people around the world are, there's higher inflation at the moment. Some of the costs, especially on government, are fixed costs. So we're then seeing we need to be doing more with less money, less resources. So how do we become more efficient? And this is where data can really help drive efficient processes, some of that automation, but also putting more data in the hands of people, but especially with AI, being able to say, how can we automate some of those processes and enable people to make faster decisions? The second area we're looking at then is how do we enable people to be more proactive? Ofcom has always been very information-based. We are an evidence-based policy maker, but we're trying to now say, how do we use that data to drive the capabilities and enable people to see what's coming up? And we're seeing this especially in online safety, where we've got hundreds of thousands of platforms that will be in scope of the online safety. And there's huge amounts of data that we need to ingest, to understand, and to be able to drive insights from. And this is somewhere where we're really trying to drive that thought around proactive capability to be able to put the information into the hands of people who are making decisions. And the last there is then saying, how do we improve stakeholder relations? So as a regulator, we've got the stakeholders who are the ultimate consumers of communications, but we've got stakeholders that are also the businesses that we regulate. And over time, we're seeing more and more smaller companies that are coming into play. So we want to be able to say, how do we use data, AI, some of that digital capabilities to enable us to promote compliance and to be able to support some of those smaller companies so we have less of a regulatory burden on them. I'm sure we can get into more around how good regulation can support innovation in the economy as well. So yeah, that's kind of how it's changed a little bit. it's the fundamentals are still the same, but the communications of it have changed.
That's very fascinating. We're definitely going to discuss the communications aspect of, change management and building a data culture, for example, within government. And, what's really fascinating about this new iteration of the data strategy is that really focusing on what's in it for the organization, for the stakeholders, right? The how is very much set there, but the what's in it for for the organization, whether it's, faster decision making, being proactive about making decisions, and improving stakeholder relationships. Now, of course, Data and AI Literacy Month is all about good people, data culture, AI culture, data skills. The way we think about data culture is both, there's two components to it, at least the way we think about it at DataCamp. There's the skills element to it, right? But there's also the mindset element to it, right? So maybe
Absolutely.
focusing on the skills aspect, walk us through in a bit more detail. What does data and AI literacy skills within Ofcom? What's the value that it unlocks within Ofcom when thinking about the data strategy?
Yes, I think if we look at the values that unlocks, there's a few key drivers. So I mentioned like the efficiency, that's a clear driver. Some of the areas that we talked about around proactive regulation and the stakeholder relations, like all of those are key measurements that you can then put an OKR around and say those are the value drivers that we have in terms of how we're doing business. But I think part of this as well is then say, how do we drive that cultural mindset in terms of what AI and data literacy will unlock? And for me, this is where we can start to look at some of the specifics, and we can look at the online safety bill and say the way that we're looking to ingest information and work through with the teams directly to build data products that puts the information directly into their hands is a key driver and key difference in terms of how we might have done one-off analytical processes or research in the past. And by doing that, we need to then make sure that those policy colleagues are upskilled in terms of understanding what the data actually means. So there's a large part of this which is working with them to help them put the information in front of them that is able to be understood, but also then training them up to understand what those capabilities are. And we're seeing something similar. We've taken that through. So one of the first data products that we looked at was looking at saying, can we take a consultation response? So we issue a consultation and then we get a lot of responses back from the businesses that we regulate in the markets, the civil society, from government, from interested parties, wherever they are. And sometimes we'll get hundreds, maybe thousands of responses, of trying to line those up to the questions that are asked and understand the sentiments behind them can be a huge task. So what we're trying to is enable our colleagues to do this faster. So we've taken this, now we're starting to work with other colleagues that are in different parts of the bank. So originally looked at that with a video sharing platform, and now looking to then move that into other parts of Ofcom, like the Spectrum team, who've just done a consultation on amateur radio. And again, looking at updating that response, is changing the data product, working with people, but again, having that continual upskilling of people within the team, say this is what the data means and what it's presenting you, and helping them to interpret the information that's coming back to them. So it's been a really interesting journey to see that direct value in terms of how that's improving the efficiency, but also enabling some of the more proactive elements in terms of what we can release.
That's really great, and I want to deep dive into with you a bit more in kind of how you've approached building data and AI literacy capabilities within Ofcom. One thing that we discussed in the podcast is that there's a lot of great folks within Ofcom who have awesome data skills, but how do you take these data skills and kind of extrapolate them to the wider organization, right? So maybe there's going to be, starting off kind of on a tactical note, is that there's a lot of data and AI leaders from government probably today on the call thinking about how do you kickstart a data and AI literacy program. So maybe where would you advise them to start when building out their data and AI literacy journeys?
With DataCamp, obviously.
That's we didn't discuss this behind the scenes. I appreciate that, Richard.
No, I think there's a multitude of areas. So the thing that I'd start to look at is the different levels of organization, and you've got to tailor the way that you work to different people. And some of my team, we've been looking at the stakeholder mapping and how that looks. So to go through 4 key stakeholders that we're currently exploring, they got the leadership. So that covers the board, our senior management team, so the group directors, and quite a lot of the senior leadership groups. So these are the directors and above that are in that. The other areas and the practitioners, so data professionals, are people who are using data day in, day out. Then there's 2 areas of people who aren't necessarily data professionals, but the first is what I'd call like the fast followers, the people who are the early adopters of the data products into the areas. And then there's that range of everyone else. And I think looking at the communications, it's really key that you've got to pull in everyone along that journey. So we've been going to our board and doing specific teachings on, like early doors, we were doing it on artificial intelligence, machine learning. What do algorithms look like? Teaching them about recommender systems and how those work on online safety or online, and where you need to be considering safe aspects of those, where you can lead to like rabbit holes and other effects from those. But then we've been going further, talking through in different sessions, deep dives into Gen AI, foundational models, talking through the history of machine learning and artificial intelligence, just so that the board and the senior management team have that understanding, the fundamental knowledge around these subjects. So the aim is to get the buy-in to the work that we're doing, but also so that they understand what these things mean, and they can ask their teams sensible questions. They can look to potentially deliver more within their areas and really take ownership of the AI and data journey at the highest level. So it's really key to get that leadership bought into this, and we've done a lot of work in terms of taking them through. When we then get into data professionals, we talked about this in the podcast, but for us, this was about looking at the roles, so the specialisms that exist within the data profession. So whether that's a data engineer, a data scientist, a statistician, econometricians, there's a full range of different specialisms that you can start to see within that data profession. And then a huge host of different skills that you could assign to people across this. And we could get into that more in terms of what the skills are, but we've tried to draw a big matrix around what the different specialisms are, and then the different levels that we have, and really saying what levels of skills we want to be able to see at different levels for those people. And the idea is to eventually start to link this through to learning and development opportunities, helping colleagues be able to identify exactly where they can upskill themselves. And that's where things like Data Camp and other online sources, but also potentially other areas like apprenticeships or other learning opportunities can start to come to the fore, to say, how do we build people's skills and help them develop themselves, especially as the technology changes, as AI becomes more ubiquitous. How do we upskill people who might not have been traditional AI people to be able to use these skills? The fast followers, so we're looking to get a group of data champions. I think we're calling them data liaison people, but essentially experts within their area who are in the business, who we can then work with and put them in touch with the data professionals and link back to everything from the data literacy through to data governance, but also be that evangelist for the data that's going out, and help them to be able to deliver. And then finally, on the everyone side, we want everyone across Ofcom to have some level of understanding of data. So firstly, data governance, the data ethics, make sure we've got that, we're using data safely, no matter who you are, you're using it in the right way. But then also, how do you understand and start to interpret some of the information that you might be seeing from data? And that's a training that we'd want everyone to go through. Beyond that, I think there's probably a bit of a process that you want people to understand, which is the innovation value chain. Like, how do you take things from ideation through to implementation, proving the value, productionizing it, and communicating those successes at every stage, so people can learn from successes, but then also rapidly adopt something that might occur in another part of the business, might be relevant to theirs, and that only comes through that successful communications program.
That's really great. And there's a lot to unpack here. You mentioned kind of these four personas of leaders, data practitioners, fast followers, and then everyone. You also mentioned the communications program. But one thing, and I would love to deep dive with you on those, but one thing that you mentioned that was pretty interesting to me that I didn't think of when, crafting questions for this session is you mentioned how, for the leaders, for example, a lot of sessions on generative AI, foundation models, generative AI is a pretty recent phenomenon. How and the data literacy program precedes kind of the rise of generative AI. How has the rise of generative AI impacted, altered the data literacy program, the upskilling program at Ofcom, and was it useful in kind of showcasing the point of look at where these technologies are going? Because I've heard from other stakeholders and customers that generative AI has been able to kind of convince a lot of potential skeptics. It's been able to drive the point home that these technologies are now in our fingerprints, in our hands, sorry, right? And they're able to provide a lot of value very quickly. So maybe walk us through kind of generative AI, its impact on the data literacy program, and how others view the importance of data upskilling.
Yeah, no. So I think Gen AI has been brilliant to some degree. It's helped us to be able to really talk through or to sell that vision, because people have suddenly lit a fire under everyone.
Yep.
Like everyone's now able to see this. I remember earlier this year, probably before we spoke, our CEO came and she does a weekly session where she updates people on what's happening in the world of Ofcom and external and everything. And she read out a ChatGPT poem. And you're like, this is like our CEO interacting with AI via the chatbot. And there's been a great thing to be able to then say, how does that enable us to talk more and to be able to sell that vision of what a data strategy can achieve and how that links back? So yeah, it's definitely been able to help us to get more buy-in for what we needed. Sometimes it can also prove a bit of a distraction.
Yep.
Whenever we're talking about then AI, machine learning, and the capabilities that it's doing, it quite often descends into a Gen AI, and not everything is Gen AI. And Gen AI has some great general applications, but then it also has some disadvantages that will come from the hallucinations, the requirements that you need for prompt engineering and everything that's now coming into that. But it's not necessarily the best use case for some specialized trained algorithm that would be needed for different areas. I think there's also cases where you're talking about a Ferrari when maybe a two-wheel bike would do. So there's cases where still natural language processing is just what's needed to be able to have some counts of words and some meta tagging of data. You don't need to go through the Gen AI solution. So trying to rein people back and say AI is not always Gen AI, and AI is sometimes more looking at some of the classical machine learning methods that are able to efficiently answer some questions. If you've got good quality data, you know what you're training. So that's part of the difficulty, I think, and why we need to have the conversations with the board, with the exec team, to help them understand what it means, what the pitfalls are, and where other capabilities might be more appropriate.
Yep. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. Just like 9-10 months ago, a random forest was considered AI, and now we think about it as classical machine learning.
Classical,
And yeah, it really goes to show just how quick mindsets change here in this space. But linear regression, logistic regression, random forest, great toolkits, great tools in any practitioner's toolkit for a lot of machine learning applications. Now, one thing as well that you mentioned when talking about the data literacy program is the personas, right? Maybe walk us through in a bit more detail when trying to develop like a learning path for all of these folks within your organization. How did you make sure that these paths are actionable for daily work, that they're aligned kind of with the business objectives, or like the the ambitions of where you would like these roles to go within Ofcom?
Yeah, so thinking about that, the journey and where we are, I think the data strategy is a multi-year program. It's not something that we can just say, oh, we've got a data strategy, click, now everything's done. So parts of it is then say, how do we start to use data as part of that driver for cultural change? I'm a data person in my background, so I like to have the information around me. So phase one of the data strategy is much more around the information that we can gather. So for everything that we're looking at in the data strategy, there's the information about the data maturity. We surveyed and audited the organization, wanted to understand who the people were who were using data. So this is where we start to survey the people who are using data, understanding where the data professionals are within the organization. They're not all within one team, they're spread out, and that's perfect. That's exactly as we want. We want people who are close to the business using data effectively. But alongside that, we want to then be able to say, well, now we know who the data professionals are, what skills they have, what's the proficiency that they have. And that's where we can start to build on the knowledge and the understanding. So we're working through this at the moment and then using that to rapidly change. We're not saying that anything's fixed. There's going to be a bit of an agile and iterative development as we come to the data literacy program to make sure as we find the people, find the expertise, and look at that with the forward look strategic workforce plan to say, how do we start to build up those skills? But as part of that, it's also looking at the external environment. There's a big change, and we've seen this. Like we're talking about AI, and yeah, you just said like random forests were great ensemble models a few months ago, a year ago, whatever it was. And now suddenly there's a new toolkit that we're having to adopt, and we wouldn't have been able to predict that a year ago how quickly that would come in.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put a prediction out and say a prompt engineer is going to be the next big desirable job that we wouldn't have even heard of a year ago. So where do we get those kind of skills and build them up and make sure that workforce plan is able to adapt to these new capabilities and make sure we're training up the people effectively? And all of that's based on the data and the information that we have to be able to drive the decisions.
That's really great. And, kind of returning back to, what you mentioned around data culture. We talked here a lot about skills, how to develop learning paths, and how to think about the skill set as you build out the strategy. But another aspect of data culture, as we discussed, is mindset, right? So, cultural change is a big aspect of driving data and AI literacy transformation, especially within government. This is probably the most important and challenging aspect of any data strategy. So, maybe walk us through why it's important and what does cultural change and mindset change looks like at Ofcom.
Yes, I think there's a few different areas within this, and I think the mindset change comes in a few different areas. But I think one of the key ones for me, and just trying to think back to where we were in the journey that we've already started on, was looking at how we can talk about data effectively, and taking people through that kind of mindset shift. And in Ofcom, because we've got different groups of policy areas. So I mentioned like the spectrum team or the network and communications, the broadcast team. There's the online safety, and then we've got cross-functional teams of the economists, the research intelligence people, the corporate teams, which includes the data team itself. There's different people who have different interpretations of what things mean. So almost like homonyms. So someone might say data, and that might mean to one team, it's columnar, like something you put in Excel and it's only going to be numbers. Another team will hear it and say, actually, you know what, data for me is all of the information that I read. And if you start having conversations with different teams, then they'll start interpreting things in a different way. So this is where I think part of the cultural shift has been saying, how do we enable people to be able to speak a common language around data, to speak a common language around what data projects are. And that's not just the technical, that's also everything that's the soft skills and the how we explain it around it. And AI has then thrown, like we've just been discussing this, like if I say AI to someone, then someone might think machine learning, someone else might think generative AI, and trying to make sure that we can understand those foundational questions in terms of what is the definitions that we're looking at as being a key cultural driver that we've said to say, make sure that everyone's on the same page, have the conversations with all of those different teams, and be able to pull everyone in to have that piece to say there's a common culture, not just one team that's leading on it.
Yeah, that's really great. And you mentioned here creating that common data language within Ofcom, and in a lot of ways, this ties into another component that you spoke about on around data and AI literacy at Ofcom, which is the communications program. So, a lot of ways, a data culture, a successful data culture, is where one, people have a common data language. Everyone sees data and AI as an asset, right? And there's a clear valuing of data upskilling and kind of the importance of treating data as an asset. So Ofcom is definitely ahead of the curve when it comes to comparing it to a lot of government agencies today. But I'd love if you can walk us through how you approach the communications program around the data and AI literacy, around the data strategy at Ofcom, and maybe share with us some of the lessons that you encountered along the way when making this message very resonant.
Um, Yeah, so I think that the thing for me in terms of then saying how do we really make this resonant in terms of what data can do, kind of goes into a few different areas. The first is really saying data by itself is meaningless if you can't then interpret the data, if you can't have good quality data that's able to produce insights, and if the people aren't there who are able to interpret those insights and make a decision based on it. So the communications, I think, always got to relate back to the value drivers. So this is where, if I took it back to those three things that we're looking to deliver, the efficiency, the proactive regulation, the stakeholder relationships, how do we improve all of those things? That's really a key part to be able to say, we've got loads of different projects that we're looking to do. That might be a pilot, it might be a data product that we're looking to push out, it might be a key piece of one-off analytics. But everything then needs to be linked back to the value and how that can work. I think the second piece is then saying, how do we start to work with people to help them understand what the benefits of data might mean for themselves? So part of it is how do we enable you to do the things that people are good at and get the computers doing the things that computers are good at, which is where some of the new AI tools will definitely have some benefits. But alongside that, taking people on the journey to say, how do the things that we can teach you through the AI literacy and the data literacy program actually enhance your career prospects at the end of it, and help build you up to be able to learn more, to stay curious, to keep doing more exciting things. And I think that's part of the driver that we've got in terms of the people side and then the projects to be able to continually build on those. And from a communications point of view, there's those two bits that are saying, how do we really enable us to be able to do it? I think the third bit is probably looking more, talking about the governance side of it, which is often a bit of a boring area and people don't want to get into it. But the thing that I found is when we were starting, trying to kick off a data project could take a long time to get agreement from the different people who it might be the data governance people, the legal teams, the cybersecurity, whatever, like all of the different people who might see risks and potentially throw up blockers. And Ofcom is a very consensual place. You want to be able to make sure that everyone agrees that this is the right thing to do, and no one was wanting to take risk. But what we've tried to do, we're trying to put out a program where you can then say, actually, we want to enable you to take risk, but in a managed way where you can mitigate risks, where you can control risks and by recording the information and actually start talking about how you can have effective risk government, enables people to deliver data projects faster. And this is another part of the data literacy, is that program management, project management around data risks, and helping people to understand that to be able to move and deliver more effectively.
I love that, and because essentially you're kind of reframing data governance as an exciting way to take risks and drive successful projects and potentially projects that would have been greenlit before. Now we do have 15 to 20 minutes left. I want to make sure that we cover at least some aspects of generative AI, how it's used at Ofcom, how you think about using it at Ofcom. Of course, generative AI today is on everyone's mind. So I'd love to understand the different type of use case you're looking at within Ofcom, and more generally, what are the type of use cases you think generative AI can unlock for government agencies, especially given the hallucination risks, bias risks that we've discussed earlier in our discussion?
Yeah, so in terms of those, so some of the areas that we're starting to explore it, and let's say you could probably take it back to the personas in terms of who are the people who will be using it. So let's start off with the simplest one. The data scientists, the data people. There's the opportunity to now use generative AI to make people more efficient, effective at coding. We've already seen examples from Copilot, but potentially like generative other Gen AI solutions to be able to rapidly give you algorithms to write code for you. It's nothing new. Like whenever I was coding in the past, I'd have a Stack Overflow window in one window, and then on another screen the coding, and you're like switching between the two, saying what's Stack Overflow, copy paste, okay, does that work? No, like this is just a more effective, efficient way of being able to do that. And I think this is definitely then saying, how do we enable people to be able to use some of the large language models in that capability? Looking at some of the other opportunities, Ofcom is and most government organisations will be, highly document-based organisations. So what's our opportunity to be able to use large language models to search, to be able to summarise, to be able to automate some of that meta tagging of documentation to enable people to find information faster. And you're right, this is where the hallucinations can be really problematic. If you start to say, can you summarize this corpus of documents? I think because of the way that large language models work, the probabilistic nature of them, they're going to always have some hallucinations that will just come out from them. I think you can we'll see examples of this as it goes forwards more, that I think you'll start to get larger prompts, larger outputs. There's the opportunity to have more history that can be built into the conversations. But ultimately, like a chat interface isn't actually what we want. We want to just be able to get the results. So if you can summarize the information directly where it is, that would be great. And we're starting to see, I think, some of this with enterprise solutions, whether that's from Microsoft, from OpenAI, from I think everyone's starting to pull in some of these methodologies. And there's a big opportunity, I think, for government and government organizations to start to adopt it. We're certainly looking at what the opportunities are, whether that's through open source models, through cloud-based models, and potentially some of the open models as well. And we're looking at running, again, risk-controlled pilots to be able to understand where the risks are, where the opportunities are, what things we would be happy to put through, which things we wouldn't, and then how do we make sure that there's a person at the end of it to understand where those risks are. And I think that QA process needs to adopt slightly to be able to understand results from large language models and generative AI more broadly. I think the third area, like we're looking at our comms team at the moment and what they can do, being able to speed up some of the TikToks, the Instagram posts, whatever it will be. Like there's a big opportunity for these guys to be able to use generative AI more effectively. I think also potentially be more exciting in their roles as well. So these technologies to be able to do that. And think these are some of the areas where I think just being able to use these technologies could effectively drive us through more efficiencies, potentially again saying how do we get information out to people faster in a way that we might not have been able to before. So how do we communicate faster or more automatically with our stakeholders through some of these models? There's years of experimentation ahead of us just thinking about some of those use cases.
That's really awesome. And we start off discussing data and AI literacy. I want to end on as well discussing data and AI literacy because you mentioned here the risks associated with using generative AI in certain use cases, the importance of putting a human in the loop, creating a QA process that is effective. Maybe as we end today's chat, walk us through the role AI literacy has in inoculating an organization, a workforce from these risks that we're talking about. I'd love to understand from you what are the skills that you're looking to grow in Ofcom in the future as generative AI and generative AI tools become more ubiquitous.
Yes, I think, and this is an interesting area because I think it depends on which parts of the team. So there's, as I was saying, I think there's bits of the team that would be probably looking at more of the how do we use the comms approach? How do we start to drive, like when we're talking about some of the skills that we're looking at or the success profiles that you might have within the data profession, I threw those into ChatGPT as a kind of first, you've got the blank piece of paper. What do I want to say in the first instance? What specialisms are there in data? And it gives you a list. And you're like, okay, let's go with that. Start from there, start to pull these apart. And me and Holly in the team have been working through that, saying, okay, let's pull these apart. And throughout all of this, there's been that kind of how do you interact backwards and forwards with some of the large language models. And I think it gives you that opportunity to be able to do that. But then as we dive into it, there's other areas that Ofcom's looking at where it comes to regulation. And part of this means that we need to understand the deep technical safety requirements that come from generative AI, from AI methods more broadly, and how those are going to impact consumers, whether that's on online safety or areas of telco or the other areas of regulation that we have, where we already have powers to regulate some of the AI and the government's just put out the AI, well, earlier in the year, put out the AI white paper where it had 5 principles of AI. And the team's currently going through those and saying, how do we understand it from a deep technical basis? So in that regard, this is now saying we need to have deeper technical understanding, so deep mathematical skills that can go into the algorithm and understand them. And we've been working with the Alan Turing Institute, where we can say, what does domain transfer look like, and how do you detect where risks might propagate throughout different algorithms as you have domain transfer. We've been looking at the algorithmic assessment and how you can look at things like age estimation models or facial expressions and how to audit large language models. So we've got a large trust and safety team with AI specialists and a suite of PhDs in AI, machine learning, deep mathematics that are able to go through this kind of basis. And those are skills that we're certainly looking to build as this becomes more ubiquitous, and we want to be able to use that. It's an exciting journey ahead of us to be able to do that.
That is really awesome. And maybe one last cheeky question, Richard, because I always like to put guests on the spot and ask for some predictions. What are your predictions for the data and AI space in the next 12 months?
So I think we're going to see it continue to grow. There's a huge emphasis on innovation within this space, and the regulators themselves are saying, how do we, from the digital regulators, the DRCF in the UK, how do we combine together, work together to be able to enable proactive regulation of innovation, so we get building up that innovation ecosystem. So I think we're just going to see more of this. It's growing, and you can kind of work on the Gartner hype cycle and say, where's that growing in terms of the future of it? But I think as we see it, will get growing. I think you're also going to see more specialist use cases for AI that'll be coming out, and those are the ones that'll be harder to predict. From a skills point of view, I've already put out my prediction on prompt engineer. I think that's going to be a growing skill that we'll see. But alongside that, there's going to be that mix of the people who are from a design point of view, who are able to put AI in front of people in a way that it can be used effectively to actually answer their business problems. People don't want a chat interface; they want their business problem solved. So, what's that next step from a chat interface? Yeah, so some predictions there.
Exciting times ahead. So we've already gotten quite a few different questions from audience members. I'll make sure to try to show them here because some of them I can't see them because the team like sends me also on a document. So I have a question here from Junaid Ahmed. How can government agencies ensure that their data and AI literacy efforts stay up to date with rapidly evolving technology? That's a great question. Touches upon that generative AI conversation that we had. So love to learn from you, Richard, here.
So for me, that's about getting people in teams who are highly curious, that are constantly looking at what's the next big thing, and putting those people on a pedestal, giving them a mouthpiece that they can actually talk about it. There's some people who will naturally like to gravitate towards the things that they already know, and you need those people in a team, but you also need diversity in a team from this kind of point of view. It's like, who can you get who's the person who's always looking at the next thing, who reads all of the tech blogs, is looking at Twitter, X, whatever we call it now, the like I don't know, every kind of social media. So there's a new form of like AI. There's this new like tool that you could be using. I want my people who are in the team to be looking at that, going home and downloading the tools and playing on it. Like, we need that capability to make sure that we've got the curiosity and people constantly upskilling themselves on what the latest advances are.
That's really great. I couldn't agree more as well. And another question here from, unfortunately, I can't see the name. I see it as LinkedIn user. Do you have a blueprint of a roadmap to start the journey for a government institution to go from data strategy to a concrete AI and BI implementation?
I've got one for us. I think that will change, and I mentioned before that data is key to what you're doing. So not just from a data strategy point of view and to be able to do it, but every organization has its own culture. They've got their own people and they've got their own value drivers. If I turn up and say, oh, here's some off-the-shelf data strategy, you can implement this and it'll work with your tech stack, your people, and your regulation, your governance policy that you have internally to deliver the value that you've set out within your own organization, I think it would fail very quickly. And need to be able to there are some key tools to be able to do this, but I think looking through the data maturity assessments, looking through the skills and the capabilities within an organization, setting out key OKRs that you have for the organization, how data can drive on those, and linking that back to the culture, the AI literacy, to be able to build on a strategic workforce plan is essential. But that will change through every organization. Maybe there is a generic version, and I need to go back and sit back and think about it, but there's probably a book in it somewhere.
Yeah, I can definitely assume, but it definitely requires some tailoring for the organization, as you mentioned. This is not a question, but more of a comment. Lorna Wendling, good people, good data, good decisions. Noted. I really like this. Very captures the essence of what a great data strategy looks like in 3 words, or in three goods. Now, also another set of questions here from audiences that I have here on the doc is maybe a question from Mark is, how do you measure the effectiveness of a data and AI literacy program as you see it growing and maturing?
Yeah. And this is an interesting one. I think I mentioned that we're taking our data strategy through 3 key phases. The first of that is to be able to have more of an audit of who the people are, the skills that they have, and the proficiency that they are. But I think as we go through it, you want to be able to then say, well, how effectively have you changed the organization? What does that organizational culture do? And I think that's where you can start to look at how much data is being used in the decision-making process, how many data products are you delivering, how many, like, what's the number of people that are logging into data products that you've delivered, whether that's a BI dashboard or an alert system, and being able to then action results from those data alerts. I think that that's the kind of thing that you want to be able to measure, is then saying, well, let's take it back to the OKRs. It might be around efficiency, around our stakeholder relations. If you're a customer-facing organization, you might have a what do you call it, customer recommendation metric, and like things like that. You can then say, how do you see those improving as you've introduced the data strategy, and which ones can you then link back to a causal relationship back to the data strategy? It's never going to be easy, because data rarely delivers directly. It always has that indirect benefit. And I think it's just trying to then understand how you can understand those causal links. But a key part for me, definitely set OKRs from the outset, know what your objective is and how you're looking to measure those.
Okay, that's really great. Couldn't agree. A good OKR, for example, would be, especially on like that, depending on the reason for upskilling, right? Let's say improving stakeholder relationships, like how many tickets you're seeing, for example, after the
Yeah.
upskilling program. There's great use cases here. Another set of questions that we've had here is on responsible use of AI in technology, right? So I think we've gotten quite a few questions that kind of touch upon the same theme. This one's from Rachel. Steve, sorry. How can government agencies ensure the responsible use of data and AI as they launch different use cases?
Yes, I think one of the first things we did, so this was even before I started in Ofcom, but something that I've definitely been really keen that we uphold, is to have a ethics policy.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just AI, this is around everything for data. And then every time that we then have a project, that will go through not just the data privacy impact assessment and the other legal requirements. A part of that is then saying, what's our ethics statement? Where do we see the ethical drivers for it? Where's the potential issues that might be coming up, and trying to work through those, understanding if there's ways we can mitigate them or what the impact might be. And I think a key part to this is to make sure that it's not just government departments. I think every area that's using data, AI, should have some kind of ethics policy, make sure they're considering the wider societal impacts that the use of data and AI will have.
Okay, that's really great. Couldn't agree on the ethics policy there. Unfortunately, we are 1 minute before we wrap up for today, and there's still some questions that we haven't been able to answer. I highly recommend that you reach out to Richard or to me directly on LinkedIn. We're more than happy to answer those questions. I want to say a huge thank you to the audience today for joining us. Do let us know what you thought of today's session. Let us know on LinkedIn. We'd love to be able to improve these sessions for you and make them even more relevant. And a huge thank you for Richard for joining us today as well, and giving us, a great overview over the value of data and AI literacy within government. This is not the only session for this week, though. Data and AI literacy month is going on all month. So tomorrow we have a session with Nathaniel Taylor Leach, who manages the DataCamp Donates initiative, on DataCamp classrooms and how to best get started. Thursday, September 7th, we have Dhiraj Rajaram, founder and chairman and CEO of Mu Sigma, who's going to come discuss on best practices for making decisions with data and AI. And next week's and over the coming weeks, we're going to have quite a lot of more sessions on data and AI literacy. And make sure to check out last week of September, where we have a special edition of Radar, our signature conference, that is really focused only on the data and AI literacy angle. We're super happy to have you there all throughout the month. Richard, I cannot stress this enough. Thank you so much for joining us today for Data and AI Literacy Month, for kicking us off with an awesome session that will hopefully be able to live up to for the rest of the month.
That's great.